So I'm going to talk on abstract concepts and how language enhances cognition in the case of abstract concepts. A brief outline of the presentation. I'm going to define abstract concepts, so to distinguish between abstraction and abstractness. Then I will outline a new theoretical proposal we have done, which is called word association tools. And I will go through the main tenets of these proposals in light of experimental evidence of our lab and in some cases of other labs. And at the end, I will discuss some open issues. So when we categorize, we always somehow abstract. Categorization always implies some kinds of abstraction. For example, if you form the category of animal, you have to abstract from the characteristics of the single animals. And animals is clearly more abstract than dog. The abstraction process is more crucial in that case. But here I'm not going to focus on abstraction, but rather I'm going to focus on a very related process, that is the process of abstractness. The process that pertains domain like that of freedom, that of fantastic, of truth. And so how do we define abstract concepts? Abstract concepts, first of all, we do not distinguish in a dichotomous way from concrete concepts. So we think there is a continuum between abstract and concrete concepts. They are arranged along a continuum. And the distinction is clearly a simplification. But just to say, at the extremes of the continuum, we can say that abstract and concrete concepts are characterized by a different kind of grounding. So consider the category of model, for example. They have a single referent, typically. We can reconduct all the elements to a single referent. It's clearly bounded and it's rich in perceptual features. In the case of abstract concepts like freedom, we have to put together a variety of situations, of experiences, etc. So they are always grounded, but in a different way. They differ also in relation to embodiment. So abstract concepts activate the 5 sensorial modalities, but to a lower extent than concrete concepts. And there is recent evidence showing that they activate more than concrete concepts interoception. They are more complex. Think of a notion like freedom versus cause compared to the notion of model. As said Larry Barsalou, abstract concepts often capture complex configuration of physical and mental events. And they are much more variable compared to concrete concepts, so variable across participants and within participants. So the same person updates the notion of freedom much more, so to say, than the notion of model. And they are highly situated. So why is it important to focus on abstract concepts, to study abstract concepts? Why is it a challenge to study abstract concepts? First of all, because, as we said, abstraction and abstractness are very sophisticated human abilities, so it's really crucial to study them. But it's very important also because in recent literature, embodied and grounded views have increased in popularity and success. And for embodied and grounded views, it's clearly important to show that not only concrete words, not only highly imaginable words, not only manipulable nouns and action verbs are grounded in the sensory motor systems, but also that abstract concepts are grounded in perception, action, and emotional interoception. Clearly, this challenge is less demanding, less strong for some abstract concepts. Abstract concepts come in a great variety, and we'll discuss this later. For example, in the case of low numbers, the grounding process is easier, so to say. The challenge is less complex, and this is also the case of emotions. But is it important to study abstract concepts just for embodied and grounded theories? No, it's important also for distributional theories. So distributional theories that intend meaning as a co-occurrence of words in context in large corpus. Why is it important? Actually, distributional theories do not have a particular problem in accounting for abstract concepts, so they don't have problems in accounting for them. But I start from an embodied approach. So in my view, distributional theories have the so-called symbol grounding problem. So it's difficult for them to ground meaning without referring to words reference. But distributional theories have provided an important insight, which is they have underlined the important role of language. Whereas embodied theories sometimes have not underlined this important role of language. I intend the role of language for categorization. I don't intend the role of language overall. So embodied theories sometimes have intended words as pointers to the reference. So words refer to an object in the word, or as shortcut to meaning. So basically to say language has been considered somehow peripheral with respect to simulation, which would be the important part of in capturing meaning. So my impression is that in the last years, this framework is a bit changing, and there are a lot of studies emphasizing the fact that words can be important for cognition, for categorization and for cognition. And the view I'm going to present intends words as sort of tools. So language can be intended as a physical tool. It has been shown that language guides us in a situation of uncertainty. So it facilitates, for example, the identification of objects. It facilitates categorization. It impacts perception. It also affects the perception of our bodily borders. So it influences our physical environment. Many studies show also that language is important as an inner tool. So language can provide an extension of our cognitive abilities and it can support our thought, for example, through language. It is obviously also a social tool, an interactive device, language. And in the last years, many studies are starting to show that it's important to study not only how language influences cognition, but how languages influence cognition. So linguistic and semiotic variation. How the different languages we speak, Russian versus Italian versus English, influence our way to think. So to say, language influences categorization, and why? Because labels are useful to create new categories. And I'm going to contend that labels are particularly used to create abstract categories. Why? Because abstract categories are characterized by very heterogeneous exemplars. So the exemplars differ extensively one from the other, and so labels can work really as glue that put together different examples. And labels can glue both sparse sensory motor experiences, but also sparse linguistic meanings. And I'm going to contend that the embodied counterpart of this is the involvement of language and also of the mouth motor system. So to summarize the view, so the idea here is that words are social tools and not only pointers to the referent. They are inner and social tools that help us to interact with the social and physical environment. They modify the world surrounding us and the way we perceive it and categorize it. They enhance our predictive abilities and they extend our cognition, they support our cognition and they extend our predictive abilities. And that this is true for all words, but particularly for abstract words. So here, the main, this is the proposal we have done. It's called Words as Social Tools. It's a proposal pertaining mostly abstract concept, but not only. Basically, this proposal is an embodied and grounded proposal. So the idea is that abstract concepts are grounded in sensory motor experience, but also this proposal gives particular relevance to the social and linguistic experience. And I'm going to contend that words Abstract words are characterized by linguistic and social acquisition, that linguistic and social brain networks are more activated for abstract concepts compared to concrete ones, that this activation of language leads to the activation of the multimodal system, and that because they are abstract and language is so important for them, they vary more across languages. So these are the main tenets, and I'm going to discuss them. First of all, I start from the first tenet, number 0, so to say. Words are grounded in sensory motor, and abstract words are grounded in sensory motor experience. I do some examples of very simple experiments from our lab. There are a variety of examples from other labs, so I'm focusing on those from our lab. I do 2 examples of 2 abstract concepts. One is number, and the other is ownership. So, number is a very special abstract concept because differently from freedom, it doesn't collapse a variety of experiences, and it has an object as a reference, but the reference can change. So we can have one cherry versus one apple versus one glass, and these references have nothing in common. And but still, there is a lot of evidence showing that numbers are grounded in sensory motor system. This is one study from our lab in which we asked whether numbers and counting are grounded in body movements, in spatial, in space and in bodily movement. Very simple behavioral experiments. Participants had to add or subtract number 3 to a starting number for 22 seconds. And they had to say the result of their calculation aloud. And in the meanwhile, they had to perform an ascending or descending movement. So they had to take an elevator, or they had to go up and down the stairs. What we found that, so the dependent variable is the number of correct calculations they made. They had to subtract or to make additions, to make addition or subtraction. We found a congruency effect when they were brought with an elevator, so an advantage of addition when they were brought up, and of subtractions when they went down. We didn't find the effect with the stairs, probably because of the double task, or because the stairs do not imply a real vertical movement. We didn't find an effect online, and in an imagery condition, the effect was present only when they went up and down the elevator. We replicated this, we had similar results, so to say, with left-right orientation, so participants perform more additions when they go on the right than on the left, and they perform on more addition when they walk in a clockwise direction versus in an opposite direction. So this is just a very simple example that shows that numbers are grounded in space and movement. But there is a huge literature on this, and as I said, I'm focusing only on the studies of our lab. Another example is the concept of ownership. Ownership can be considered as an abstract concept. Why? This is an apple, and this is, and this is a stolen apple. So the apple and the stolen apple do not differ from a perceptual point of view. So as Bentham said, there is no image, no painting, no visible trait which can express the relation that constitutes property. It is not material, it is metaphysical, it is a mere conception of the mind. And this is an example of how ownership can be grounded in spatial experience. So in this case, if we look at the beach from upwards, we typically tend to assign the umbrella to the person or the persons who are engaged. So we studied ownership recently with an implicit task. There are many studies using explicit tasks, so participants are explicitly required about the property of objects. In this case, participants were shown pictures and they were presented with sentences, and they had to decide whether the sentences make sense or not. Pictures like this, for example, the object here is close to one of the characters, and they had to decide whether the sentence, the boy owns the ball or the girl owns the ball, makes sense. We recorded response times, and the aim of the study, I'm not going into the details of it, is to identify the role of different embodied cues in determining ownership. So we wanted to study spatial proximity, temporal priority, so the first person who discovers an object, is he or she perceived as the owner of the object, and touch, so the idea of physical possession. And we also contrasted these elements. So an example of contrast is this. In this case, the participant was shown with different images in which the woman discovers the object, so she is the first to see the object, but then the man, the boy, is touching the object. So we contrasted those. In this case, we contrasted temporal priority and spatial proximity. So the man discovers the object, but the object is close to the book. And they had to decide whether the sentence makes sense. So the blackboard marries the kangaroo doesn't make sense, where the glasses belong to the book does make sense. And we computed response times. So what did we find? We found that all three elements, so spatial proximity, temporal priority, and touch, are important in ascribing ownership. We found an unexpected result, so the effect of gender, going into detail here because it's not so relevant. And we found that physical contiguity and touch are more relevant than temporal priority. But my point here is that ownership is an abstract concept. We found that there is a minimal sense of object ownership, which is grounded in respect to possession, established by others. So basically, the idea is that ownership is based in physical control over an object. Okay, so the idea here is that these two examples are of grounding of abstract concepts such as number on one side and ownership on the other side in spatial and bodily experience. So I'll come back to the slide on with the tenets. So abstract concepts are grounded in sensory motor systems. And now I'm going to develop the first tenet, so that acquisition is mostly linguistic and social. This is an example of this. So consider this boy. He has to form the category of ball. He has different experiences of balls, but he needs obviously the linguistic input to form a compact category. But the linguistic input is less crucial for him than for her. She has to develop the concept of fantasy, to build the concept of fantasy, and to do it, she has to put together a variety of heterogeneous experiences. They are so different that she needs more the input of another person. And if we look at the literature, there are some data that are consistent with this view that highlight the importance of social and linguistic aspects, in particular for abstract concept acquisition. For example, there are some studies showing the comprehension, very early comprehension of abstract concepts at 10, 14 months. Very simple abstract concept, not freedom, but concept like all gone or something like that. And the authors relate to this to the development of important social abilities, such as the ability around 10 and 14 months of children to develop the ability to follow the gaze and object attention. Later children start to, the idea is that the role of social input increases. For example, children disengage from physical objects, they learn through overhearing. Then around 3, 4, and 5, 6 years, there are a lot of studies on testimony that show that children learn to rely on reliable informants. So they select the reliable informants. In particular, when they have to tell them information on abstract concepts, like or concepts related to abstract domains, like that. And there is also literature showing that around 8, 9 years, children learn emotions, and these emotional concepts, and that emotional concepts might help them to acquire other, even more abstract concepts like freedom and justice. Also, literature on age of acquisition shows that abstract concepts are acquired later than concrete concepts. So 5, we have only 20% of abstract work, they are 60–70% later. And literature on modality of acquisition, these two dimensions are correlated but not equivalent, showing that acquisition of abstract concepts is mainly linguistic and not perceptual. We did some studies on this, on trying to mimic acquisition of abstract concepts with artificial categories some years ago in adults. So basically, the question we had was, does learning of abstract concepts involve language, and does this involve embodied counterpart? So very simple tasks again. Participants were shown objects that could be concrete. So they were novel objects with novel shapes, very rich in perceptual characteristics, or abstract. So elements that collapsed together, they were not single elements, and formed new movements or relations. In this case, they had to manipulate them with a mouse. In this case, they had simply to observe these new relations. And then they were given a new word. A new word was assigned to this and to concrete and to abstract concepts. Then they were given a lot of tasks. One of the tasks was a property verification task. So they were required to decide whether, for example, the fusapple, one of those objects, was red or not. And they had to respond either with a keyboard or with a microphone. And we found that with concrete words, participants were faster with a keyboard, whereas with abstract words, they were faster with a mouse. So it seems that abstract concepts involve more language, and that this leads to the activation of the mouth. Another study along the same line, in which we changed a little bit the training, again with artificial categories, but again to mimic conceptual acquisition. Participants directly manipulate entities. So abstract concept here, concrete concepts were manipulated as object with a protruding part, for example, with a very distinctive perceptual characteristic, whereas concrete concepts were more relational elements that have a particular relation. Participants manipulated these objects, the two objects, and the experimenter verbally explained to them the word meaning. So, for example, Kalona is a stagger stack with a yellow protrusion. Panotto is when two objects touch each other to form a concavity. And what did we find? We had a categorical recognition task after. We asked them whether two objects belong to the same category. The categorical recognition task occurred both before and after the training. And we found that the performance with concrete categories was, this is obvious, better than with abstract categories. But importantly, the linguistic training facilitated more abstract than concrete concepts. And with no linguistic training, hand responses were facilitated, while with linguistic training, the advantage of hand responses disappeared in the case of abstract concepts. So it seems there is an association between abstract concept and language and motor system. We also controlled with ratings of Italian words of a database by Barca and others, whether this involvement of the hound's mouth is due to the fact that abstract categories are less compact than concrete categories. So we had concrete categories which are compact, like beer and glass, so whose members are not heterogeneous. Concrete categories whose members are heterogeneous, like cars or insects. And abstract concepts like comfort and category. And we found that in the case of concrete compact categories and concrete heterogeneous categories, there is always an advantage of the hand, whereas in the case of abstract concept, this advantage of the hand disappears. So, the first issue was acquisition of abstract concepts. So it seems that acquisition of abstract concepts passes through through the linguistic dimension. The second tenet, I'm not going to develop it, but it's the idea that the brain areas recruited must be social and linguistic. There is a lot of evidence showing that abstract concept activates areas like, in particular, the left inferior frontal gyrus, so an area related to sub-vocalization, phonology, verbal working memory, and temporal areas, left temporal areas, left superior temporal sulcus, superior temporal gyrus, left middle temporal gyrus. So areas typically related to language processing. At the same time, there is evidence that both concrete and concept activate also sensory motor areas. So let me go. So this is what I try to develop: linguistic and social acquisition of abstract concepts, linguistic and social brain networks more activated for abstract concepts. I'm going to develop the third point. This activation of language can lead to the activation of the mouth. Again, very simple experiment. Here we wanted, as I said, we tested that, we verified that abstract concepts activate more the mouth with artificial categories. Now we wanted to test it with real words. So in this case, we had a very simple task in which participants were presented with definitions, abstract and concrete, followed by abstract and concrete words. And they had to press the button where the definition was appropriate to the word. And in order to respond, they had either to press the button with a hand or to press this device used for paraplegics among the team. So, very simple task: fixation, cross, definition, target word, and response with the mouth or with the hand. In general, because of the device, hand responses were faster, but we found an interaction between the effector and the type of words. So with abstract words, the difference in response times between the mouth and the hand responses was less pronounced. So it seems that this difference occurs also with real words, not only with artificial words. Here you can see we plotted abstractness and mouth and difference, logic, reason, motive, career. These are all very abstract words and words that have a very that activate a lot the mouth. Other words that activate more the hands. We tested it with further tasks. So we tried to verify whether the effect is present only in deep in tasks that imply a deep semantic processing. We performed a similar task with a lexical decision. We didn't find the effect, the difference between the hand and mouth in lexical decision, but we found again in recognition. So we found less errors with abstract concepts compared to concrete ones. So far, the studies so far, I have presented so far, have shown mainly that there is a facilitation in responding with the mouth, with abstract concepts, and with the hand with concrete ones. But now we wanted to investigate whether what happens when we interfere. We are doing some interference task. This is a task in which we had participants perform two different tasks while deciding whether words were abstract or concrete. So in one case they had to squeeze a ball. In another case they had to perform articulatory suppression. And we wanted to investigate whether articulatory suppression disrupted inner speech, so to say, and had led to higher difficulties with abstract concepts. And this is the case. We have to perform further controls on this study. So this is actually the case. So it seems that there is this online interference. And also we wanted to test whether we also wanted to introduce offline interference. So we wanted to test whether the fact that you use a device in the mouth during the acquisition of words impacts your abstract concept knowledge. So we did a longitudinal study on the effects of pacifier. So we wanted to see whether how long children have used the pacifier and we wanted to see whether this affects word acquisition in children. We tested late effect of pacifier. So we tested the effect of pacifier with a definition task in 6 years old, with a categorization task in 8 years old. And we have some further ongoing studies in kindergarten. And we had, concrete, abstract, and emotional concepts. Because, as I said before, emotional concepts are less abstract than other abstract concepts, so they can represent an interesting subset. So children 6 years old were asked to define concrete and abstract concepts. We didn't find any difference in how long they have used the pacifier. We used a questionnaire to parents in order to determine how long they have used the pacifier. We didn't find any difference pertaining to the pacifier. We found a difference in accuracy. So children define better concrete concepts than emotional and abstract, and define better emotional than abstract. And this is quite clear. Then we analyzed the relations produced by children. I'm not going into details. Relations, for example, emotional relations, free association, spatial relation, taxonomic relation, etc. We coded that. And what did we find? This is a correspondence analysis showing that children who use the pacifier for more than 3 years, so for long, tended to distinguish less concrete from abstract and abstract from emotional concepts. So basically, the distinction between concrete and emotional and concrete abstract is less marked for children who use the pacifier for longer. And also, with Hill-square analysis, we show that children who use the pacifier for longer produces less free associations in relation to abstract concepts. Which are the mechanisms underlying this? With emotional concept, one could say it's a problem of facial mimicry. So your face is occluded, so to say, by the pacifier. So you might have difficulties in, so you might receive less input from parents. There might be less motor resonance due to this. And so this, there are some studies by Niedenthal showing that children who use for long the pacifier have more emotional difficulties than children. In the case of abstract concepts, however, we think that it can be due to the fact that the mouth is occluded, so this occlusion of the mouth might determine difficulties in rehearsing the meaning of the word. We have, as I said, a further study in which we tested categorization in 8 years old. Again, a very simple study, this time with response times. Again, children who had used pacifier for different periods. The children had to press a key on a keyboard if the word referred to an animal or to another key if it was not an animal. And the not animals were abstract, concrete, and emotive words. And we recorded response times and accuracy. And here you can see there children who use the pacifier longer than 3 years. So the more children use the pacifier, the more there was a divergence between abstract and concrete concepts. So we can say, so what can we say from these studies? We can say that it seems that abstract concepts involve language and involve the mouth, and we found this in some facilitation studies. So when participants have to respond using a device that involves the mouth, there is a facilitation. We found it in studies mimicking conceptual acquisition in adults. We found it against in adults in conceptual processing tasks, the study on definitions. And we have some evidence on interference. So when we process abstract concepts, it seems that response times are longer when there is an articulatory suppression, so an online interference, and there is a possible influence of pacifier determining a long-term interference. And there are convergent studies in other labs. For example, in the lab of Tavanti, they have found that abstract concepts are more associated to the mouth compared to concrete ones, particularly abstract concepts referring to mental states. And there is also recent fMRI evidence in the lab by Pulver-Müller, Pulver-Müller found higher mouth model system activation, especially with abstract mental concepts. But which are the possible mechanisms underlying this involvement of language and involvement of the mouth? We think of some possible mechanisms. They are not mutually exclusive. A first mechanism could be, given that the acquisition of abstract concepts is more linguistic and social, we might re-enact this acquisition experience during processing. This is one possibility. Another possibility, abstract words are quite complex, so we might re-explain their meaning to ourselves, for example, through inner speech. Another possibility, we have proposed this word social metacognition. So basically the idea is that in the case of abstract concept, you would be more uncertain. You would be less sure of the meaning, so there is a higher uncertainty. So you have more difficulty in predicting the meaning of abstract concepts, so you need to rely more on others. It could be that this motor activation is a preparation to talk to others, to ask information to others. So there could be a link between this social metacognition, mouth activation, and inner speech. So the more concepts are abstract, the more we feel uncertain, and then we have difficulties in predicting the meaning, and we speak to others. But so far I have spoken of concrete and abstract concepts. But it could be that this role of social metacognition is more pronounced, in more abstract mental content, in more abstract concepts, such as the mental ones. So, whereas in other abstract concepts, like for example emotions, interoception or other dimensions, other bodily dimensions are the mental. So far I have considered that as I didn't want to say it's dichotomy, but I consider abstract and concrete, but I think it's important, we think it's important to analyze the single distinctions within abstract concepts. So far, this is what I said so far. So that in the case of model, we would activate more tactile sensation, visual sensation, acoustic sensation, also interoception and proprioception. But in the case of abstract concept, we would activate more all these dimensions, but also, for example, more metacognition, more proprioception related, for example, to the activation. Okay, but as I said, abstract concepts, there might be differences within abstract concepts. There is, for example, a recent paper by Ludwig Design showing different brain activation in relation to different kinds of abstract concepts. So what did we do? We did some studies to investigate this. This is a study in which we asked the participants to evaluate, to rate on different dimensions for more than 400 abstract words, Italian abstract words. And we used different dimensions, the more classical ones like imaginability, concreteness, abstractness, contextual availability, but also other ones, for example, interoception, the five senses, body-object interaction, so how much does the concept activate the body, metacognition, social metacognition, how much do you need the other to understand the meaning of abstract concept, emotionality, sociality, etc. And then we perform a principal component analysis, and we privilege a three-component solution in which we have this dimension, which is abstractness, abstractness, concreteness, a dimension which is this one, inner grounding, and a dimension which relates to sensory motor aspects. How is abstractness defined? Abstractness is defined with late age of acquisition, linguistic modality of acquisition, and social metacognition. So we need a lot of the others in the case of abstract concepts. In the case of concrete concepts, they are highly imaginable, they activate many body-object interactions, and they activate more complex. So, as you can see, this is inner grounding, so emotional, interoception, sociality, and activation component, and this is component related to the senses, so touch, smell, etc. The 5 senses plus the hand. Then we did cluster analysis in order to determine whether the 400 and more words we had divided into different clusters depending on the different role of the components we identified. And we found 4 different kinds of clusters. One, we called it emotional inner states, for example, including words like, for example, anger. One, including spiritual philosophical elements like value, belief, also religion. Another, collapsing, putting together more physical, spatiotemporal, and quantitative elements, addition, reflect, sound, etc. And another more related to sociality and self, so also emotional, but more related to social aspects. And if you can see here, if we analyze this graph, we can see that the component, the first component is, the first frame is concreteness, abstractness. As you can see, the blue are physical, spatiotemporal, quantitative elements that are quite concrete, opposed to spiritual, philosophical elements, which are more abstract, within abstract concepts. Inner grounding and social elements. You can see that self and sociality elements and emotional inner states are very relevant compared to the other. And if we consider sensory motor aspects, the group of self and sociality has a particular role. So to say, there are different kinds of abstract concepts that differently activate these different emotions. And so we performed a very simple task in which we wanted to verify again with interference whether different components are activated with the different kinds of concepts. So in this case, participants had to perform 2 tasks at the same time. They had to decide whether a word was difficult or not on a 5-point scale with a touch screen. And we took their choice and we used response times as covariate. And in a second task, they had to perform a concurrent task. And this concurrent task could involve them all. It was a gum chewing task. Polinsky has used it recently in other studies. They had to manipulate a ball to test the involvement of the hand. They had to use a task typically used to measure interoception, so to determine whether we're good in determining how often they are beating. And they had to have articulatory suppression, to pronounce a syllable, while determining the difficulty of words. So just to, we used Bayesian framework analysis to perform the analysis. Just to clarify, we intend the increase of difficulty ratings as a sort of interference. So I evaluate a word more difficult if I have, if that particular condition has interfered with my experience. And what we found? We found that, as you can see there, heart beating with abstract concept, there is a higher interference of heart beating, so a strong role of interoception. It seems that, and a high interference of gum. It's gum chewing. So the activation of the mouth increases the difficulty ratings of abstract concepts. With concrete concepts, there is more interference with the softball manipulation, as you can see. What was not as predicted was the articulatory suppression. So we found an interference of articulatory suppression. We found an increase of difficulty ratings with articulatory suppression, both with the concrete and with abstract concepts. We don't know why. We think that it's possible that it depends on the task. It's not an aligned task. They have time to decide. So it's not. We took response times, but the task is a simple evaluation task. That's a possibility. Then we analyzed the single, as I said, abstract and concrete concepts. But abstract and concrete concepts were composed by different sub-concepts. So we had philosophical, in the case of abstract concept, we have philosophical and spiritual, physical, spatiotemporal, and self and sociality and emotional concepts, that concept we identified in the previous studies. And in the case of concrete concepts, we use the most used in the literature. So tools, animals, and we used food because we were interested in the interoceptive language. And I'm not going to discuss the detail, but we found, as predicted, that heart beating can determine a higher interference with social and emotional concepts, and GAM slightly, so a bit more interference with philosophical, spiritual concepts, and Paul with the more concrete among the abstract concepts, so those related to thought. So to conclude, these are different abstract concepts activate different embodied components. So some abstract concepts are more concrete, like the concept of numbers, of quantity, etc. So they are more interfered by the ball. Emotional, there is a huge effect of interoception, and the more abstract are slightly more affected by mouth manipulation, but not articulatory suppression. So I said linguistic social acquisition, linguistic and social pairing networks more activating for abstract concept. Activation of language implies the activation of the mouth, and I spoke about the variety of abstract concepts. The last point I'm going to make very shortly pertains to linguistic variability. So basically the idea is, if for abstract concepts, linguistic experience is so crucial and so important, then they should be more affected by linguistic variability. We have only some preliminary studies on this, but if we analyze the literature, I think that we can find evidence for this. I make only two examples. An example of a studies on time. There are a lot of studies showing that the notion of time, which is very abstract, varies consistently across languages, across writing directions, across cultures. On the opposite side, studies on objects, like for example, on very famous studies on containers. These studies show that participants might differ in naming these objects, but they are convergent in sorting. So cultural differences emerge at the linguistic level, but not at the conceptual level, so to say. And so it's possible that the more, in the case of concrete concept, environmental constraints are stronger. And so the support of the environment is stronger, whereas in the case of abstract elements, there should be higher variability. We did only some analysis of the literature, and we can say that time, numbers, emotions, the concepts of time, numbers, emotions vary a lot across cultures, whereas in this case, the variability is less. But this is really, this is one point we should, how much do I have? We should.
Wrap up if possible.
5 years. Okay. So I'll go to the conclusion. I spoke at the beginning of the challenge of abstract concepts. So I think that in order to address the challenge of abstract concept, it is necessary to reevaluate the role of embodied linguistic and social experience, to investigate fine-grained differences within abstract concepts, and also to consider differences across languages. We have an initial study I have not described, but in which we found, comparing Italian and Iranian participants, in which we found really the opposite effect with respect to concreteness. So Iranian participants seem to not have an opposite concreteness effect when compared to Italian. So this is to say that it's very important to perform studies that consider differences across languages. And so again, the general framework, what this proposal, what are social tools? On one side, it represents an extension of embodied theories. It is clearly an embodied theory, but compared to other embodied theories, it emphasizes more the role of social and linguistic experience. With respect to distributional theories, there is a common emphasis on language. But here the focus is more on linguistic experience overall, as a whole, and not only on word association. And we stress the role of the embodied counterpart of linguistic activation, that is the role of the mouth. And we also stress the importance of the social aspects related to language. And it gets some inputs also from semiotic, pragmatics, and also developmental studies, and also anthropology. Which are the open issues, and I'm going to conclude. So I spoke a lot of the role of language, how language is important for categorization. We consistently found this evidence of malactivation, and we speculated about possible mechanism, but we have to better understand this mechanism, for example, to perform more studies on the role inner speech might play. Inner speech, both in its regulative, also mind-wandering aspects, and also bad mind-wandering aspects like rumination. We stress also the role of sociality with the notion of social metacognition. But when do we need others? Only when we acquire abstract concepts, we need others when we process them, because we are more uncertain on their meaning. Again, here we have to investigate them more. And also, we think we think that it's important to use different methods. So, other methods, so to use more interactive methods, because if sociality is so crucial, in particular for abstract concepts, that we should study them in interaction, so in peers and groups, etc. And also we should consider fine-grained differences among abstract concepts and identify better the role of the different components. For example, this interoception component, which is important on one side, but for more embodied abstract concepts, and these social components, social metacognition components, that might be for more crucial for more abstract mental abstracts. And that is it.
Thank you very much for that. This is, sorry, I didn't hear this before starting a recent experiment on abstract, but fascinating. Questions, please. Start with the microphone.
Hi, I was just wondering when you were talking about pacifier use in children and long-term pacifier use, you said it seemed to have an impact on some different, their ability to develop abstract concepts. I was just wondering, how can you be sure that it's the pacifier use that's causing that, and it's not? For example, you mentioned that there was also an association of emotional problems with children with longer-term pacifier use, so I'm just wondering, how do you know where the causal direction?
So I'm aware that we have to be very cautious with these results on pacifier. We don't want to adopt any recipe following from those. So we have controlled. So we excluded children who had linguistic problems, etc. We have controlled the social background of children. And to my astonishment, I must say, we didn't find an effect. We didn't find any difference in relation to the pacifier use, depending on the social class of the parents. We are now doing some studies, not only on long-term effects of pacifier, but on language in children in kindergarten. Again, with questionnaires with parents. And we are controlling now parental style. So we are trying to investigate whether parental style might have an effect. So we are very aware that this is a very delicate issue, and also from the results, I analyzed them very quickly, but we found that there is no difference, for example, in accuracy of definitions. It's just that the pattern is a little bit different, and so we cannot come up with any solution as to whether we use a lot of pacifier. So in some cases we were tasked with this, but
the concrete words were not affected, right?
Sorry?
The concrete words were not affected by the pacifier.
Yeah.
Martin,
You go first.
Okay. So you focus on the abstract side of things, but on the concrete side, I mean, the hand movement may be associated with the concrete in the same way that the mouth movement might be associated with the abstract. Is that correct? So, I mean, I noticed you like some of your words, the concrete was things like brush, which obviously hand movement related. So is it? I mean, so could you make this argument the other way around? That is to do with concreteness rather than to do with abstractness.
Right. So we think, so the results are not the product of, so the results we found are not the product, we can make this in claim, so that the concept would be more grounded in manual sensory motor experience, whereas alpha concept in the mouth activation. These are the claims. The focus of the proposal is on abstract concepts, because there are a lot of demonstrations of the activation of the hand motor system with concrete concepts. So the focus is more there.
So if your words were bite rather than brush, might you not get mouth movement?
Okay. So we did exclude all words directly related to the mouth across the studies. Yeah.
So, I just want to mention that a lot of this resembles Paivio's ideas, right? Because although he didn't talk about embodiment or grounding, but he did make the point that abstract concepts are associated with verbal knowledge and they're acquired through a verbal thing. But I just want to ask you a more general theoretical question. So, if you think of the semantic system or the conceptual system as distributed, say, over Mueller kind of idea that you have different kinds of features that are activated in different parts of the brain, is this saying anything more than the fact that abstract concepts are going to have different kind of associations, features, if you think like social or verbal, linguistics or other concepts. So it is simply about the nature of the associations that abstract concepts have is different from the concrete ones. Are you claiming anything more than that? This is see what I mean?
Okay.
Because you will find, there will be these associations that arise from experience. So it's not surprising that abstract concepts associated with social interactions, because that's how you experience it. It is experience-based.
Okay. But the general point is that clearly it's an experience-based framework. But so there would be two different ways to address this point. A point addressed simply on the content of abstract concepts, and in that case, you would not distinguish abstract and concrete concepts. So the concept of car activates actions, you typically use in interacting with a car, and the concept of freedom activates situations related to freedom. We say something more. We say that in the case of abstract concept, because of their peculiar acquisition modality, probably that's one possible explanation, or their peculiar ways of processing. So the fact that we are more uncertain in determining their meaning, there is something different. So that we need to rely more on language. So it's not simply that we activate different contents, but also that there is a different mechanism. So that would be the idea. I don't know whether.
Thank you. Two more questions. One from Nick on the back.
Thank you, this wonderful talk. So, my great colleagues in Finland, so Lauri Mummelma and the others, they're constructing bodily maps of various concepts, for example, emotions. So when you're in love, so it feels some way here and so on. But they have also extended, so the research to other concepts than emotional concepts, for example, abstract concepts. And it seems, so when you actually map your abstract concept, they come to the head area. I don't remember exactly whether they come to the mouth, but so this is kind of interesting, so connection to what you just said. So have you read these papers, perhaps?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I could actually send you a couple of some
Yeah,
references, so,
thank you.
because there could be interesting connection here.
So is the question whether it's mouth or head?
So because I don't remember exactly so where they go, so when they actually describe so where these concepts are, so very close to the mouth area. Yeah. Right.
Thank you very much, very insightful talk. I had two questions regarding the pacifier. Did you look at the use of the thumb? Do you have any data on that? That's the first question. You're looking at it, yeah. And the other one.
We had it in this first study. We had looked at the pacifier use of the thumb. Now we are controlling for it. Yeah. We are doing some further studies.
Okay. And what about the abstractness effect in deaf people? Do you have any data on that?
There is some evidence, not from our lab, showing that, or from Dutch deaf people, showing that they might have more difficulties with abstract compared to concrete concepts. We are going to perform a study on that. I did a study with Virginia Volterra and other people working on Italian Sign Language. Not directly on that, but on Italian Sign Language, in order to investigate whether words related to abstract topics involved more linguistic aspects. And we found some evidence, but I must say more systematic studies have to be done on this, showing that for example, in Italy you have some concept like truth. Truth in Italian is vero, and you use this letter. And in the case of some abstract concept, sign language uses more letters. So letters are reproduced with the hand. So when you are not able, so to say, to mimic the meaning of the concept, using the content, you refer to the language, to the corresponding spoken language.
It's phonologically encoded rather than conceptually.
Right. But we are doing some studies in order to investigate whether the effect of the mouth is present in different ways in deaf people, because this should be the case.
Should be right. Maybe a brief question. Please.
Yeah, a little question. I was just wondering to what extent, putting something in your mouth precludes, the use of inner speech, So I shouldn't do it, but I sometimes put like a pencil in my mouth or something like that, and, so then I just don't think it disturbs inner speech at all, actually, but...
So I don't know whether you got...
Well, so it seems that inner speech is kind of important, for abstract concepts you need the mouth, right? So, right. I think you're sort of implying that if you cannot use inner speech, so it's sort of harmful for developing abstract concepts. So, yeah. And I'm just wondering if you have something in your mouth, whether that kind of is really...
I can answer this, that there are many studies on articulatory suppression, suggesting that articulatory suppression might disrupt inner speech. This is if you have something in the mouth and you actively use it, like chewing a gum, for example, or munching a pen, I don't know. So actively using the mouth is different than simply have something in the mouth.
It's true. Yeah.
So there might be different effects.
Before we wrap up, can I just ask you, what was the gender effect for the ownership?
We found that people tend to think that the owner is male. So,
So much for political correctness. This was really
so male has a strong motor resonance effect. So when they saw a male character, they tend to respond faster, but the effect was present also in humans.
right. This was really inspiring. Let's have a coffee break, but before that, let's thank